The morning sun cast long shadows across the fields of Iowa as Ethan Miller stood on his weathered porch, coffee mug in hand.
Slowly,
At 42, the lines etching his face had deepened this
far too
past year, carved by
near.
drought and debt in equal measure. The farmland that stretched before him, 60 acres that had been productive for generations, lay parched and unyielding. The soil cracked like an old photograph, left too long in the sun. His gaze fell on the broken-down tractor beside the barn, its faded green paint peeling away like dead skin, the engine seized up 3 weeks ago at the worst possible moment. The repair estimate sat on his kitchen table, $4,000 he didn't have. Behind him, the screen door creaked open. Lily, his 7-year-old daughter, stepped onto the porch, her stuffed giraffe clutched in one arm. She wore mismatched socks, and her blonde hair stuck out at impossible angles, still tousled from sleep. Those eyes, though so like her mother's, were already alert and taking in the world. Is the tractor still broken? Her voice, small but determined, cut through the morning stillness. Ethan's chest tightened. Even at 7, she understood too much about their situation. Yeah, pumpkin, but we'll figure something out. He ruffled her hair, fighting to keep his tone light. Always do right, Lily nodded solemnly, clutching her giraffe tighter. Mr. Spot says we should get a magic tractor that never breaks. Her serious expression cracked into a smile, revealing the gap where her front tooth had been. The bills spread across the kitchen table told a different story than the one Ethan shared with his daughter. Property taxes due next month. School supplies for Lily's upcoming second-grade year. The mortgage payment already 2 weeks late. And now the tractor without it, there would be no fall harvest, meager as it might be in this drought. 4 years since Elizabeth's death, and he was still barely treading water. He'd left behind a promising career as a mechanical engineer to move back to his hometown after Elizabeth's diagnosis. She'd wanted Lily to grow up somewhere with space to run, with clean air and starry nights. They'd had 18 months together in this house before the cancer took her. Now it was just him and Lily, and a farm that demanded more than he could give. The Midwest Chronicle lay folded on the table, yesterday's news already stale. But as Ethan pushed aside the bills, a small boxed advertisement at the bottom of the page caught his eye. Estate Auction Machinery Tools Antiques, property of Walter Thompson, deceased. The Thompson name rang a bell, an old industrialist who'd owned the ironworks outside Des Moines before it shut down decades ago. The ad listed miscellaneous mechanical items and agricultural equipment scheduled for Saturday morning. Ethan's mind wandered to his broken tractor, to the parts he might salvage for cheaper than buying new. He hadn't been to an auction in years, not since his father's tools were sold off to cover medical bills. The memory stung, but necessity pushed through the pain. He couldn't afford pride, not with Lily depending on him. Saturday morning arrived with the first hint of autumn in the air. Ethan's neighbor had promised to keep an eye on the property, and with no money for a babysitter, Lily sat beside him in his rusted pickup truck, her legs swinging above the floorboards, chattering about the clouds that looked like dinosaurs and spaceships. The old truck groaned as they turned onto the gravel road leading to the Thompson property, joining a line of vehicles already snaking toward a sprawling warehouse. The auction yard buzzed with activity. Men in work clothes clustered around equipment, kicking tires and peering under hoods, their voices a low murmur of technical assessments and speculation. Ethan held Lily's hand as they navigated through the crowd. Her eyes widened at the maze of machinery, combine parts, threshing drums, engine blocks, stacked like the bones of mechanical dinosaurs. For 2 hours, Ethan watched as pieces went up for bid, calculating what he could afford, what might be compatible with his equipment. He bid on a water pump, but lost to a farmer from the next county. An oil filter assembly went for more than he could justify. With each lost opportunity, the knot in his stomach tightened. He'd promised Lily ice cream on the way home, a small treat to compensate for the long, boring morning, but even that $5 was starting to feel like an extravagance. As the crowd thinned and the sun climbed higher, Ethan was about to call it a day when something at the far edge of the lot caught his eye. Half buried in weeds and shadow stood a massive hulk of metal, unlike anything else in the yard. He made his way toward it, Lily skipping alongside him, and stopped short when he realized what he was looking at. It was a tractor, or what had once been one, a steam-powered behemoth from another era. Its great iron wheels had sunk inches into the soil, so the metal stack rising like a smokestack from its center. Decades of exposure had blackened its riveted panels, but through the grime, Ethan could just make out a nameplate, Titan 1918. His engineer's mind whirred with recognition. This was museum-grade equipment, one of the earliest mass-produced steam tractors in American history. Lily tugged at his sleeve, her voice hushed with awe. "Dad, it looks like a sleeping robot." An auction worker nearby chuckled, overhearing her. "That old monster hasn't moved since Herbert Hoover was in the White House. Old man Thompson hauled it over from Illinois decades ago. Said it was one of the first steam tractors ever built. Museum piece now, if you can find a museum that wants a ton of rust." Ethan ran his hand along the machine's flank. The metal was cool despite the sun, its surface rough like ancient bark. Something about it called to him, not just the engineer's appreciation for historic machinery, but something deeper. This massive iron beast had outlived its builder, had witnessed the transformation of American agriculture from steam to diesel to computers. It had survived, forgotten, but unbroken. When the auctioneer finally made his way to the Titan, most of the crowd had already dispersed their trailers loaded with more practical purchases. The man adjusted his hat and raised his voice. "Antique steam tractor. One of a kind, no guarantee of function. Who'll start me at 50? The few remaining attendees exchanged glances. No hands went up. 20, still silence. 10. Ethan felt something twist inside him, a strange compulsion he couldn't explain. The engineer in him saw a fascinating historical artifact. The farmer saw a worthless relic. But the father in him remembered Lily's words, a sleeping robot waiting to be awakened. His hand rose before he could second-guess himself. $1, he called out. Laughter rippled through the Smyrna crowd. The auctioneer's eyebrows shot up, his mouth quirking into a smirk. $1, well, folks, looks like we've got ourselves a historian here. He glanced around for any competing bids, finding none. Sold to the gentleman in the cap for $1. The gavel came down with a crack that echoed across the yard. Just like that, Ethan Miller owned a century-old steam tractor. The logistics of transporting the Titan consumed the rest of the day. The auction house had a crane, but the ancient machine groaned in protest as they lifted it onto Ethan's borrowed flatbed trailer. Metal screeched against metal, and for a heart-stopping moment, Ethan thought the chains might snap. But the iron beast finally broke free of the earth that had nearly reclaimed it, swinging precariously before settling onto the trailer with a deep, resonant thud. People stared as Ethan secured the chains, their expressions ranging from amusement to pity. He felt their judgment like a physical weight. What kind of fool spent his Saturday hauling home a useless relic when he couldn't even afford to fix his working tractor? But when he glanced at Lily sitting patiently in the truck cab, her face pressed against the window in fascination, those doubts receded. Sometimes magic came in unexpected forms. The drive home was slow and tense, the trailer groaning under the Titan's massive weight. As they approached their farm, the setting sun flared against the machine's cracked steel skin, and for a fleeting moment, it glowed red in the dying light like some ancient creature stirring from hibernation. Lily's eyes grew wide. "Dad, look, it's waking up." By the time they reached the farm, the sky had darkened to indigo. Stars pierced the darkness overhead as Ethan maneuvered the trailer beside the barn, positioning it where the morning light would give him the best view for inspection. He unhitched the chains, muscles aching from the day's labor, and stepped back to look at their new acquisition. The Titan loomed against the night sky, its silhouette both alien and oddly dignified. Lily stood beside him, uncharacteristically quiet, her small hand finding his. "What are we going to do with it?" she finally asked. Ethan squeezed her hand. "First, we're going to clean it up. Then we'll see what's inside. Maybe we can make it a monument to the farm, a piece of history." Later, after tucking Lily into bed with promises of tractor adventures in the morning, Ethan sat at the kitchen table with a cold beer, staring at the single-dollar bill. He'd spent the last of his pocket money until the end of the month. He should feel foolish. Instead, he felt a strange sense of anticipation, as if he'd set something in motion that was bigger than himself. Sunday morning brought brilliant sunshine and Lily's boundless energy. She was up at dawn, already dressed in her overalls, her working clothes, she called them, and tugging at his arm before he'd finished his first cup of coffee. "Come on, Dad, the robot tractor is waiting." They gathered supplies, wire brushes, rags, a bucket of soapy water, WD-40, and the toolbox Ethan had assembled over years of fixing farm equipment, and before that, precision machinery during his engineering days. As they approached the Titan dew still glistening on its blackened surface, Ethan realized just how massive the machine truly was. Standing nearly 12 feet tall at its highest point, with drive wheels 6 feet in diameter, it dwarfed his modern tractor. Ethan lifted Lily onto the operator's platform, carefully testing the rusted metal first to ensure it would hold her weight. Her eyes widened as she surveyed the array of levers, gauges, and valves. "This is where the driver sits." Ethan nodded, pointing out the various controls. "This lever here engages the drive wheels. These valves control the steam pressure. This gauge tells you how hot the boiler is running." As he spoke, his engineer's mind cataloged the ingenuity of the design, the elegant simplicity that had allowed machines like this to transform American agriculture a century ago. They started by clearing away layers of dirt and vegetation that had accumulated around the base. Beneath decades of grime, the Titan's original paint emerged in patches, a deep forest green with gold pinstriping along the boiler. Ethan explained to Lily how the machine worked, how coal or wood would be fed into the firebox heating water in the boiler to create steam, which would then drive the pistons that turn the massive wheels. "It's like a train that can drive through fields," Lily said, scrubbing at a brass fitting with surprising determination. Ethan smiled at her analogy. "That's exactly right. These machines came after horses, but before gas engines. They were how America fed itself during World War I. As the morning wore on, neighbors drove by, slowly, clearly curious about the strange new addition to the Miller farm. A few stopped to ask questions, their expressions shifting from skepticism to interest as Ethan explained the Titan's historical significance. By midday, the outer surface was beginning to look less like scrap metal and more like the technological marvel it had once been. After lunch and Lily's reluctant agreement to a short nap, she'd been up since dawn. After all, Ethan turned his attention to the firebox. The door was rusted shut, requiring leverage from a long wrench to break the seal. It opened with a metallic groan, revealing an interior thick with soot and ash. He shined his flashlight inside, expecting to see the characteristic fire tubes that would have carried heat through the water jacket. But something about the echoes didn't sound right. He knocked on the inner wall, listening carefully. The sound came back dull and heavy, not the hollow ring he expected. He frowned and knocked again, moving along the inside rim. The tone changed halfway up, low and muted, as if behind the wall lay not empty space, but something solid. Ethan stepped back, rubbing his chin. That wasn't how a firebox was built. In his years as an engineer, he'd studied historical designs, even restored antique engines as a hobby. This modification wasn't original. He reached for a hammer from his toolbox and tapped more systematically along the interior surface. The abnormal area covered about 2 square feet of the rear wall. Beneath the layers of soot, the metal looked different there, newer, smoother, welded with a precision that didn't match the riveted construction of the original machine. It wasn't corrosion or damage. It was a deliberate addition, a second layer of metal carefully integrated to look like part of the original design. Someone had modified the Titan's firebox, creating a hidden compartment within the boiler itself. Curiosity overrode caution. Ethan retrieved his angle grinder from the barn, fitted it with a cutting disc, and returned to the Titan. The motor whined as he brought the spinning blade carefully to the edge of what he now believed was a secret panel. Sparks flew in a golden cascade as the grinder bit into the steel. The smell of hot metal filled the air, sharp and acrid. After a few minutes, the blade broke through. Ethan stopped, heart pounding, as a thin line of light penetrated the darkness inside. He wiped sweat from his brow and peered closer. Deep within the narrow gap, something glinted, a dull yellow reflection like brass or something else. He reached in with a screwdriver and tapped. The echo was soft cushion. Running his fingers along the newly cut edge, he felt fabric. He killed the grinder and stood in silence, listening to the soft ticking of cooling metal and his own heartbeat. Whatever was hidden inside that steel chamber had been there for decades, sealed away deliberately by hands long since turned to dust. Night fell, but Ethan couldn't bring himself to continue cutting. Lily had awakened from her nap and returned to help clean the exterior, and he didn't want her present when he opened the compartment. Who knew what might be inside his mind, cycled through possibilities. Old documents, mechanical patents, personal items the original owner had hidden away. Or nothing at all. Perhaps it was just an unusual repair, a structural reinforcement that looked suspicious only because of its age. After dinner and Lily's bedtime, Ethan sat on the porch staring at the Titan's silhouette against the star-filled sky. He thought of the auctioneer's smirk, the laughter when he'd bid his dollar. Whatever secret the machine held, it had waited a century to be discovered. It could wait one more night. But as he rose to go inside, a faint sound from the direction of the barn caught his attention, a hollow metallic thud, like the settling of heavy steel or something shifting within. He froze, listening. Only cricket songs and the distant hum of a car on the highway answered. Still, he walked to the barn and secured the doors with a padlock before returning to the house, an uneasiness settling over him like the evening dew. Monday dawned gray and cool with the promise of much-needed rain hanging in the heavy clouds. Ethan drove Lily to school, his mind still occupied with the Titan and its mysterious modification. At the drop-off line, Lily leaned over to plant a kiss on his cheek. "Don't open the robot's heart without me, okay?" Ethan blinked in surprise. "What do you mean, sweetie?" Lily's expression was earnest. Her voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper. "The special part inside the tractor, the part you were looking at yesterday, that's its heart, and I want to see what's in there too." Children's intuition never ceased to amaze him. "I promise I'll wait for you," he said, though his curiosity burned like a physical ache. "We'll open it together after school." The hours crawled by. Ethan forced himself to focus on other farm tasks, fixing a section of fence that had come loose, checking irrigation lines for the small vegetable garden that supplemented their grocery budget. But his thoughts kept returning to the Titan, to that gleam of yellow he glimpsed within its modified firebox. At 3:30, he picked up Lily from school. She bounced into the truck, backpack clutched to her chest, words tumbling out about her day, her art project, the caterpillar they'd found on the playground. But as they turned onto their road, her chatter died away, replaced by a wide-eyed stare. A black pickup truck was parked beside the barn, a man in a flannel shirt examining the Titan. "Who's that?" Lily asked, pressing her face against the window. Ethan slowed the truck. "I'm not sure." He didn't recognize the vehicle, though. In a community this small, most faces were familiar. As they pulled into the drive, the man turned. Mike Foster, who owned the farm adjacent to theirs, raised a hand in greeting. Ethan relaxed slightly but remained puzzled. In the 4 years he'd lived here, Foster had never once stopped by uninvited. Ethan parked and helped Lily down from the truck. She immediately ran to stand protectively beside the Titan, her posture suggesting she was prepared to defend it if necessary. Foster was a barrel-chested man in his 50s with weathered skin and calloused hands that spoke of a lifetime of physical labor. His expression was friendly enough, but something in his eyes, a sharpness, a calculation, put Ethan on alert. "Quite a find you've got here, Miller," Foster said, patting the Titan's boiler. "Saw you hauling it in yesterday. Thought I'd stop by and take a look. Don't see many of these old steam rigs anymore." Ethan approached, maintaining a casual demeanor despite his unease. "Thompson Estate Auction. Practically gave it away." Foster nodded, running his hand along the freshly cleaned surface where the manufacturer's plate now gleamed dully. "Titan 1918, my grandfather used to talk about these. Powerful machines. Changed everything when they came along." His fingers lingered near the firebox door, which Ethan had closed and latched after his discovery. Getting inside her. The question seemed loaded somehow. Ethan shrugged. "Just cleaning her up. Thought she'd make a nice piece of history for the farm." Foster's gaze was penetrating. History has a way of hiding in plain sight, doesn't it? Machines like this? They've seen things, been places. He tapped the boiler, carried all kinds of cargo in their day. Before Ethan could respond, Lily piped up from the other side of the machine. "It's our robot tractor now. Dad bought it for $1. Foster's expression softened as he looked at the little girl. "Is that so? Well, you've got yourself a bargain then." He turned back to Ethan, his tone shifting subtly. "If you ever decide it's taking up too much space, I'd be interested. My family's got a connection to these old machines. I'd pay good money, real money, to take it off your hands." Ethan's instincts hummed with warning. "Not looking to sell right now, but I'll keep it in mind." Foster nodded, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "You do that. These old relics, they can be more trouble than they're worth sometimes. Take care now." He climbed back into his truck and drove off, gravel crunching under his tires. Lily waited until the truck had disappeared down the road before speaking. "I don't think he's a nice man, Dad." Ethan knelt beside her. "Why do you say that?" She scrunched her nose in thought. He looked at our tractor like Tommy Morris looks at my lunch when he wants to take it. Out of the mouths of babes. Ethan couldn't have articulated it better himself. There had been a hunger in Foster's examination of the Titan, a proprietary interest that went beyond casual curiosity. And how had he known so quickly about the purchase? News traveled fast in small communities, but not that fast, especially about something as inconsequential as an old tractor bought at auction. After a quick snack and homework check, they returned to the Titan. The sky had darkened further, the air heavy with the promise of the coming storm. Ethan positioned his work lights around the firebox and helped Lily into her jacket against the cooling air. "Ready to see what's inside?" he asked, picking up the angle grinder. Lily nodded solemnly but stayed back at a safe distance as he'd instructed. The grinder whined to life again, sparks flying as Ethan carefully extended the cut he'd started the day before. The metal was thick, at least a quarter-inch of solid steel, and progress was slow. After 20 minutes, he'd created a three-sided cut that would allow the panel to be bent back. He set the grinder aside and donned work gloves before gripping the edge of the cut metal. It resisted at first, then gave way with a groan, bending outward to reveal a cavity roughly 2 feet square and a foot deep. Inside, illuminated by the work light, were 3 rectangular bundles wrapped in what appeared to be canvas, darkened with oil and age. Lily gasped. "Treasure like in pirate movies." Ethan's throat went dry. He reached in carefully and lifted out the first bundle. It was heavier than he expected, dense and solid in a way that made his pulse quicken. Setting it on a clean tarp he'd spread nearby, he cut the twine binding the canvas and slowly peeled back the fabric. The material inside gleamed dully in the artificial light, a rich, unmistakable yellow that no other metal could mimic. Not brass, not copper, gold. Pure gold, formed into bars approximately the size of a paperback book, each one stamped with numbers and what appeared to be a seal bearing a crown and a star. Lily's eyes were saucers. "Real gold, like real gold." Ethan nodded, unable to find his voice. His engineering background included enough materials science to recognize genuine precious metal. This wasn't fool's gold or some cheap alloy. These were standard gold bullion bars, probably weighing close to 10 pounds each. At current prices, each bar would be worth well over $100,000. With trembling hands, he unwrapped the second bundle. More gold bars, but mixed among them were papers, thick yellowed sheets with fading ink. He lifted one, carefully mindful of its fragility. "Manifest number 14, Industrial Reconstruction Shipment." He read aloud, his voice hushed. "Property of the War Department, 19. Below the heading were columns of figures and codes most meaningless to him, though he recognized weights and serial numbers that likely corresponded to the gold bars. At the bottom was a signature, Captain D. Morgan, alongside an official-looking seal from the Department of Commerce. Another document bore similar headings but included a line that made his blood run cold. "Shipment rerouted by special order, Rotterdam, New York, Chicago." Ethan's mind raced to connect the pieces. The Titan built in 1918, the gold property of the War Department in 1919, the rerouting of a shipment. America had entered World War I in 1917 and emerged victorious alongside its allies in November 1918. This government gold had been part of a post-war reconstruction effort shipped from Europe to America. But instead of reaching its destination, some portion of it had ended up hidden inside a steam tractor, concealed for over a century. The third bundle contained something stranger, still a folded map drawn on thin parchment, one side covered in faint red pencil lines tracing routes across the Atlantic and into the American heartland. Scrawled in the corner were the words, "Hold until recalled." A chill crawled down Ethan's spine that had nothing to do with the cooling evening air. This wasn't some farmer's rainy day fund or a bootlegger's hidden stash. This was government property, military cargo, deliberately concealed. By Thompson, by someone who worked for him. The documents suggested an organized operation, not a simple theft. Lightning flashed briefly, illuminating the barn through the open doors, followed seconds later by a rumble of thunder. Rain began to patter on the roof, quickly intensifying to a steady downpour. Lily, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, suddenly spoke. "Are we rich now?" The innocent question jolted Ethan back to reality. He looked at his daughter, her face glowing with excitement, then back at the gold bars gleaming in the artificial light. A dozen bars at least worth over $1 million by his rough calculation. Enough to save the farm, pay off every debt, secure Lily's college fund, replace every piece of aging equipment, and all of it almost certainly stolen, hidden away during one of the most turbulent periods in American history. "No, Pumpkin," he said softly. "We're not rich. This isn't ours." Her face fell. "But you bought the tractor. The man said it was yours for $1. Ethan chose his words carefully. "I bought the tractor, yes. But this gold, it belongs to someone else. It was put here a long, long time ago, and it's our job to figure out who it really belongs to." Even as he said it, uncertainty gnawed at him. The rational, law-abiding part of him knew he should contact authorities immediately. But another part, the struggling single father, the man who'd watched his wife die while drowning in medical bills, who now faced losing his farm, whispered darker suggestions. Who would know the gold had remained hidden for a century? The government had long since written it off. Whoever had placed it there was long dead. Lily's voice broke through his moral crisis. "Like returning a lost puppy, we have to find who it belongs to." Ethan swallowed hard. "Something like that." He began carefully rewrapping the bundles. "It's getting late and this storm's picking up. Let's put everything back for now and think about what to do next." They secured the gold and documents in the bowls and returned them to the hidden compartment. Ethan bent the cut panel back into place as best he could and covered the Titan with a tarp against the intensifying rain. As they hurried back to the house, the wind picking up around them, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. After Lily's bath and bedtime stories, she'd requested The Honest Woodcutter, the tale of a poor man rewarded for his honesty about a golden axe which felt like the universe playing a cosmic joke. Ethan sat at the kitchen table, rain lashing against the windows, his mind churning. The gold had been hidden for a reason. Someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to conceal it within the body of a machine that by design would have been examined only rarely. The craftsmanship of the hidden compartment suggested military engineering, not a makeshift hidey hole. And the documents with their official seals and routing information pointed to something far more complex than simple theft. Ethan's thoughts returned to Mike Foster's unexpected visit, his peculiar interest in the Titan, his mention of a family connection. Had he known what the machine contained? Was that why he'd offered to buy it? And if so, how had that knowledge been passed down through generations? Lightning flashed again, briefly illuminating the yard through the kitchen window. In that split second of brightness, Ethan caught a glimpse of something that made his blood freeze. A figure standing at the edge of his property, barely visible through the curtain of rain. Then darkness returned, and he couldn't be sure if he'd seen anything at all. He rose quickly, switching off the kitchen light to eliminate his silhouette, and peered out into the storm. Nothing moved except the trees bending in the wind. After several minutes of watching, he convinced himself it had been a trick of the light, his imagination fueled by the day's discoveries. But as he turned away, his phone rang, the sound jarringly loud in the quiet house. No number appeared on the screen, just unknown caller. Ethan hesitated, then answered, his voice cautious. "Hello?" For several seconds, there was only silence on the line, broken by the faint sound of breathing. Then a voicemail, deliberately distorted. "The Titan holds secrets that don't belong to you. Walk away while you still can." The line went dead before Ethan could respond. He stood frozen, phone still pressed to his ear as thunder rolled across the sky outside. Someone knew. Someone was watching. And they wanted what he had found. Sleep didn't come easily that night. Ethan checked the locks twice, then stationed himself in the living room with a clear view of both the front door and Lily's bedroom. The storm raged on, wind howling around the eaves of the old farmhouse, rain drumming against the roof. Perfect cover for anyone wanting to approach unseen. By dawn, the storm had passed, leaving behind a washed, clean world glistening in the early light. Ethan, bleary-eyed from his vigil, found no evidence of intruders when he checked the property. The Titan stood undisturbed beneath its tarp, the barn doors still locked as he'd left them. After getting Lily off to school, he'd driven her directly to the building. Rather than letting her take the bus, unable to shake his unease, Ethan headed straight for the county library. The elderly librarian raised an eyebrow at his request for archives from the early 1900s, particularly anything related to Walter Thompson or the local ironworks, but led him to a small room lined with microfilm readers and metal filing cabinets. For hours, Ethan scrolled through yellowed newspapers and county records, tracking the ghost of Walter Thompson through time. He discovered that Thompson had indeed been a mechanical innovator, securing patents for several industrial machines before the First World War. During the conflict, his factories had been converted to produce components for military vehicles and transport equipment. After the war, he'd shifted back to agricultural machinery, including early tractors. But halfway through a 1920 issue of the Midwest Industrial Review, Ethan found the name that made his pulse quicken. A small article described Thompson as briefly investigated in 1918 for irregularities in government contract fulfillment and the loss of industrial materials during shipment transfers. The charges, according to the piece, had been dismissed due to insufficient evidence. Loss of government assets. The phrase echoed like a hammer striking metal. The gold Ethan had found stamped with government seals and accompanied by War Department documents couldn't be coincidence. He dug deeper. Another clipping dated months later described a mysterious fire that had destroyed one of Thompson's warehouses. The article mentioned that the blaze had concluded all pending inquiries into the company's operations. After that, Thompson's name faded from public record, though property documents showed he continued to own significant land holdings until his death in 1956. As closing time approached, Ethan gathered his notes, thanked the librarian, and stepped out into the late afternoon sun. The streets of the small town were quiet storefronts closing for the day. As he walked to his truck, a reflection in a shop window caught his eye, a figure across the street standing too still watching him. Ethan turned fully heart-hammering, but the figure had already stepped back into an alley between buildings, vanishing from sight. He hurried to his truck, hands shaking slightly as he unlocked the door. The sense of being followed intensified as he drove home, a pair of headlights appearing in his rearview mirror, maintaining a consistent distance behind him until he turned onto the dirt road leading to his farm. The knot in his stomach tightened as he approached his property. From a distance, he could see that the barn door stood slightly ajar, not fully open, but definitely not as he had left it. He parked the truck and approached cautiously, wishing he'd brought his shotgun from the house. Inside, the Titan stood exactly where he had left it, but the ground around it told a different story. Fresh footprints led toward the firebox, larger than his own. The tarp had been moved, folded back neatly rather than pulled away haphazardly. Someone had examined the machine with care, with purpose. Ethan's hands trembled as he approached the hidden compartment. The cut panel appeared undisturbed, but when he bent it back, his worst fears were confirmed. The bundles had been rearranged, not taken, but clearly handled. One of the documents was missing the map with its red pencil roots. In its place lay something new, a plain envelope yellowed with age but recently sealed, resting atop the canvas-wrapped gold. Ethan tore it open, dread pooling in his stomach. Inside was a single sheet of paper, freshly typed. "You don't understand what you have uncovered. Do not contact anyone. Do not dig further. Some things were meant to stay buried." No signature, no return address. Just those 3 sentences, clinical and threatening in their simplicity. Ethan stepped back from the Titan, the note clutched in his hand. His sanctuary had been violated. The secret he'd discovered less than 24 hours ago was already known to others. Others who had been inside his barn, who had his phone number, who knew about Lily's school. The weight of it all crashed down on him. This wasn't a lucky find that might save his farm. This was danger, real danger that threatened not just his livelihood, but his daughter's safety. Whatever history lay buried in that machine, it had tentacles reaching into the present, connecting to people willing to trespass and threaten to protect their interests. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, casting long shadows across his land, Ethan made a decision. He needed help, but not from local authorities who might be connected to the same community as whoever had left the note. He needed someone with expertise, someone who could help him understand what he'd found and navigate the potential legal and historical implications. The county library had a community bulletin board where he'd noticed a flyer earlier that day, something about a journalist giving a lecture on lost histories of the Heartland. The name came back to him now, Rebecca Chen, author of a series of articles about forgotten wartime artifacts. He'd only glanced at the flyer, but he remembered the university logo and the date, tomorrow evening at the community college 1 town over. A plan began to form. He would secure the gold tonight, hiding it somewhere other than the Titan. Then he would attend the lecture, approach this Rebecca Chen afterward, and cautiously sound her out about historical artifacts from the post-war era. If she seemed trustworthy, perhaps she could help him understand what he'd stumbled into. As darkness fell, Ethan heard the distant sound of a vehicle on the main road, its engine cutting suddenly. He scanned the tree line at the edge of his property, where the shadows were deepest. For a moment, he thought he saw a faint glow, like the ember of a cigarette winking in the darkness. It disappeared seconds later. He closed the barn doors, securing them with a new padlock, and hurried back to the house. There he called his neighbor to ask if she could watch Lily after school tomorrow, a fabricated doctor's appointment, his excuse. Then he checked every lock, drew every curtain, and settled in for another night of watchful waiting. Whatever secrets the Titan held, they were now his burden to bear. And with every passing hour, he became more certain that those secrets were more dangerous and more valuable than he could have imagined when he raised his hand at that auction and offered $1 for a piece of forgotten history. Sleep eluded Ethan that night, his mind racing through possibilities, none of them comforting. The gold bars, gleaming evidence of some long-forgotten conspiracy, represented both salvation and danger. Their value could save his farm, secure Lily's future, and erase the mountain of debt that had grown since Elizabeth's illness. But their presence had already brought threats and intruders, transforming his peaceful sanctuary into contested ground. Dawn found him at the kitchen table, red-eyed and exhausted, staring at his half-empty coffee mug. The morning routine proceeded on autopilot, preparing Lily's breakfast, packing her lunch, checking her homework folder. She sensed his distraction, studying him with eyes too perceptive for a 7-year-old. "Dad, you look like you didn't sleep," she said, spooning cereal into her mouth. "Is it because of the treasure?" Ethan nearly choked on his coffee. "What makes you think that?" Lily shrugged with a child's deliberate nonchalance. "You were different after we found it. Your eyes got all worried, like when the bank people call. Children miss nothing. It's complicated, pumpkin. Finding something valuable doesn't always mean it's yours to keep. Like when Tommy had to give back the $20 he found in the hallway at school. The principal said it belonged to someone else, even though he found it." "Exactly like that." Ethan managed to smile. "Except this is a grown-up version with more grown-up problems." Lily considered this, her face scrunching in thought. "Is someone trying to take it away from us? Is that why you're scared?" The question struck like a physical blow. He'd tried so hard to shield her from his worries, to maintain the illusion of security, despite their precarious circumstances. Now the discovery in the Titan threatened even that fragile pretense. "I'm not scared," he lied, forcing conviction into his voice. "I'm just thinking hard about doing the right thing. Sometimes that's not as simple as it seems." After dropping Lily at school, taking extra time to watch her safely enter the building, Ethan drove to the abandoned Johnson property 3 miles down the road. The dilapidated farm had been vacant for years, its fields returning to prairie, its buildings slowly collapsing into the earth. The root cellar, however, remained intact, a concrete bunker built into a hillside designed to withstand the region's notorious tornadoes. With a shovel from his truck and a heavy-duty flashlight, Ethan descended into the musty darkness. Decades of fallen leaves had blown in through the partially collapsed entrance, forming a thick, decomposing carpet. He worked quickly, digging a hole 3 feet deep near the bridge wall, lining it with a waterproof tarp, then lowering in a metal toolbox containing 2 of the gold bars and photocopies he'd made of the documents. The 3rd bar and the original papers remained hidden in a locked gun safe at home, behind a false panel he'd installed years ago for securing valuables. Better to distribute the risk, he reasoned. If someone came looking, they wouldn't find everything in one place. By mid-morning, Ethan had returned to the library, a different branch in a neighboring county, where he was less likely to be recognized. Here he used a public computer to research Rebecca Chen, the journalist whose lecture he planned to attend that evening. Her online profile revealed an impressive background: degrees in history and journalism, a Pulitzer nomination, publications in major historical journals. Her specialty appeared to be overlooked artifacts of American conflict, items that revealed hidden aspects of wars and their aftermaths. One article particularly caught his attention: Misappropriated Assets, the Shadow Economy of Post-WWE Reconstruction. The piece detailed how billions in gold and supplies earmarked for rebuilding Europe after the Great War had traveled through complex channels, with significant amounts disappearing along the way. Chen had documented several cases where artifacts and valuables had surfaced decades later, often in unlikely places. If anyone could help him understand what he'd found in the Titan, it would be someone with this expertise. The lecture was scheduled for 7 that evening in a small auditorium at Riverside Community College. Ethan spent the afternoon attending to neglected farm tasks, his body working, while his mind continued to process the implications of his discovery. The anonymous caller, the intruder, Mike Foster's suspicious interest, all suggested an organized effort to recover what he'd found. But why now, after a century, had the Titan's appearance at the auction triggered long-dormant contingency plans? At 5:30, Ethan picked up Lily from his neighbor's house. Mrs. Winters, a retired school teacher who'd lived on the adjacent property for 40 years, greeted him with her usual warmth, though her eyes lingered on his face. "Everything all right, Ethan? You look like you're carrying the weight of the world." Ethan forced a smile. "Just farm troubles. You know how it is." She nodded sympathetically. "That old place has seen hard times before. It'll weather this storm too." Only she knew the true nature of the storm gathering around them. Back home, Ethan prepared a quick dinner, helped Lily with her math homework, and called Kate, his sister in Des Moines, to arrange a weekend visit for Lily, a precautionary measure that felt increasingly necessary. As 7 o'clock approached, he settled Lily in front of a movie with strict instructions not to open the door for anyone and to call him immediately if anything seemed wrong. He hated leaving her alone even briefly, but bringing her to the lecture would only create more questions. The community college campus was quiet when Ethan arrived, most evening classes already in session. He followed signs to the humanities, building a low brick structure at the east end of the grounds. The lecture hall was half filled with what appeared to be a mix of students and local history buffs. Ethan chose a seat near the back, close to an exit, his instincts on high alert. At precisely 7, Rebecca Chen strode onto the stage. She was younger than he'd expected, perhaps in her early 30s, with short black hair and rectangular glasses that framed intense, intelligent eyes. Her presentation, Buried Secrets, How Artifacts Reshape Our Understanding of History, proved riveting. She discussed how items discovered decades after wars often revealed narratives that contradicted official accounts: smuggling operations, diverted funds, covert alliances. "History isn't just written by the victors," she told the audience, her voice carrying an authoritative passion. "It's rewritten by the finders, those who unearth what others tried to bury." A single artifact can collapse a century of carefully constructed narrative. The words sent a chill down Ethan's spine. Is that what he'd found, a truth someone had tried to erase? After the lecture, in a brief Q&A session, most attendees filed out while a few approached Chen with follow-up questions. Ethan waited, rehearsing his opening in his head, fighting the urge to simply walk away. When the last enthusiast finally departed, he approached the podium where Chen was packing her laptop. "Ms. Chen, I found your lecture fascinating, especially the section about post-war asset transfers." She looked up, assessing him with a quick, professional glance. "Thank you. Not everyone finds financial logistics as interesting as I do." "Actually, I was hoping to ask you about something specific: the movement of gold reserves after the First World War, particularly shipments that might have been diverted." Her hand stilled on her laptop. "That's a rather specific interest. Are you a historian?" Ethan shook his head. "A farmer. But I recently acquired something that might relate to what you were discussing, a steam tractor from 1918 with some unusual modifications." The casual tone he'd aimed for fell flat even to his own ears. Chen's expression shifted subtly, her professional smile giving way to genuine curiosity. "What kind of modifications?" Ethan hesitated, suddenly aware of how vulnerable he'd made himself by initiating this conversation. The lecture hall was now empty, except for them, the building quieting as evening classes ended. "I'd rather not say too much here. Is there somewhere we could talk more privately?" Wariness flickered across her face. "I don't typically meet with strangers outside of professional settings, Mr. Miller, Ethan Miller." He ran a hand through his hair, aware of how suspicious he must seem. "Look, I understand your caution, but I've found something that I think relates directly to your research, something potentially significant. And honestly, I'm not sure what to do with it." She studied him for a long moment, then reached into her bag and withdrew a business card. "I'm staying at the Riverside Inn through Friday. There's a coffee shop in the lobby that stays open until 11. If you'd like to continue this conversation, I'll be there at 9 tomorrow morning." "Not tonight, then." Disappointment mingled with relief as Ethan took the card. "Thank you, I appreciate it." As he turned to leave, Chen called after him, "Mr. Miller, if what you've found is what I think it might be, you should be careful who you tell about it. History has a long memory, and old debts don't always stay buried." The drive home took 20 minutes each mile, increasing Ethan's anxiety about leaving Lily alone. When he finally pulled into the driveway, the house appeared undisturbed, exactly as he'd left it. Inside, he found Lily asleep on the couch, the movie's end credits scrolling across the television screen. He carried her to bed, her small body warm and trusting against his chest, and tucked her in without waking her. Only then did he notice the piece of paper on the kitchen table, a sheet from Lily's drawing pad folded in half. His name was written on the outside in unfamiliar handwriting. His heart racing, Ethan unfolded the paper. Inside was a message printed in neat block letters. "Final warning, the Titan and its contents are not yours to keep or share. Return what you found or face consequences." Beneath the words was a crude drawing of a child's stick figure with Lily's name beside it. Cold fury washed over him, eclipsing fear. They had entered his home while Lily was alone. They had stood in the same room with his sleeping child. The violation transcended property and privacy. It was a direct threat to what he loved most. Ethan moved through the house, methodically checking locks, windows, closets. Nothing else appeared disturbed. No forced entry. Whoever had left the note had managed to enter and exit without breaking anything, a professional, or perhaps someone with a key. He retrieved his shotgun from the gun safe, loading it with trembling hands. The rest of the night passed in tense vigilance, Ethan moving between Lily's room and the windows overlooking the yard and barn. Dawn brought no relief, only the certainty that he could no longer handle this situation alone. At breakfast, Ethan tried to maintain normalcy for Lily's sake, though his exhaustion made it difficult. "How would you feel about visiting Aunt Kate this weekend?" he asked, forcing brightness into his voice. "Maybe stay for a few days." Lily looked up from her toast, immediately suspicious. "Why is something wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. I just have some business to take care of, and I thought you'd have more fun in the city than hanging around here." The lie tasted bitter. "What kind of business?" "Grown-up business. Boring stuff." Lily's eyes narrowed. "Is it about the gold? The treasure in the robot tractor?" Ethan sighed. There was no point pretending with her. "Yes, it's about that. Some people think it belongs to them, and I need to figure out who's right." "Are they the bad people who left the note?" Ethan froze. "What note, Lily?" She set down her toast. "I woke up when you were gone. There was a man in the kitchen. He put a paper on the table and told me to go back to sleep and not tell you I saw him. He said it was a surprise for you." Her voice quavered. "I was scared, so I pretended to sleep again." The room seemed to tilt around Ethan. Did he touch you? Talk to you besides that?" Lily shook her head. "He just put the paper down and left. I heard his car." Ethan moved to kneel beside her chair, pulling her into a tight hug. "Lily, I'm so sorry. I should have been here. I shouldn't have left you alone." She hugged him back, her small arms tight around his neck. "Are we in trouble, Daddy?" The direct question, the fear in her voice, crystallized something in Ethan. "No, pumpkin. We're not in trouble. But I think it's definitely time for you to visit Aunt Kate." 2 hours later, Ethan watched Kate's SUV disappear down the road, Lily waving from the back seat. He'd called his sister at dawn, giving her a sanitized version of events, trouble with some locals over an antique he'd purchased, concerns about trespassers, wanting Lily away from potential conflict. Kate, always pragmatic, hadn't pressed for details, simply offering to take Lily for as long as needed. With Lily safely away, Ethan turned his attention to his meeting with Rebecca Chen. He gathered the documents he'd kept at home along with the single gold bar and headed toward a riverside. The town was busier than usual, a farmer's market filling the square with vendors and shoppers. Ethan parked a block from the inn, scanning the area for familiar faces or suspicious vehicles before entering. The coffee shop occupied a corner of the lobby, its large windows overlooking a small courtyard garden. Rebecca Chen sat at a table near the back, a laptop open before her, a half-empty coffee cup at her elbow. She looked up as Ethan approached, her expression carefully neutral. Ethan sat across from her, keeping his voice low. "Thank you for meeting me." Chen closed her laptop. "You said you found something in an old steam tractor, something related to my research." No small talk then. Ethan appreciated her directness. Yes, but before I explain further, I need to know that this conversation stays between us, at least for now. She raised an eyebrow. That depends entirely on what you tell me. If you're confessing to a crime or planning one, I won't promise confidentiality. Nothing like that. But what I found has already brought threats to my home, to my 7-year-old daughter. I need to know who I'm dealing with before I take any official action. Something in his tone must have conveyed his sincerity because Chen's expression softened slightly. All right, tell me what you found, Mr. Miller. Ethan described the auction the Titans purchased and his discovery of the hidden compartment. He mentioned the documents but didn't reveal the gold testing her reaction first. The papers reference a shipment from the War Department in 1919, rerouted from its original destination. There are manifest routing orders official seals. Chen leaned forward, her professional detachment giving way to genuine interest. May I see them? Ethan hesitated, then reached into his jacket, extracting a manila envelope containing copies of the documents. She examined them with practiced efficiency, her eyes widening as she read. These are authentic, she murmured, half to herself. The seals, the paper stock, the typeface, all consistent with War Department communications from that era. She looked up sharply. Was there anything else in the compartment? These manifests list items by weight and serial number. The moment of truth. Ethan studied her face, searching for any sign of deception or hidden agenda. Finding none, he nodded slowly. Gold. Government-issued gold bars stamped with a crown and star emblem. Chen's breath caught. How many at 12 bars each, weighing approximately 10 pounds? She did the calculation quickly. At current prices, that's over $1 million, I know. And you have them, Bing. I've secured them, not all in one place. Chen sat back absently, tapping a finger against her coffee cup. Mr. Miller, what you found isn't just valuable, it's historically significant. After World War I, the U.S. government coordinated massive gold transfers to stabilize European economies. Billions in gold reserves moved across the Atlantic, managed by a joint Allied command structure. But records show discrepancies, shipments that left Europe, but never officially arrived, assets that disappeared from accounting ledgers. She turned one of the documents toward him, pointing to a signature. Captain D. Morgan here was part of a special logistics unit responsible for transferring gold reserves from Rotterdam to New York, then distributing them to regional Federal Reserve banks. There were rumors never proven that certain officers diverted portions of these shipments for private interest. Your discovery could be the first tangible evidence of that conspiracy. Ethan's mind raced to connect these revelations with his local mystery. The man who owned the Titan, Walter Thompson, operated an iron works that built military transport equipment during the war. He was investigated for loss of government assets in 1919, but the charges were dismissed. Then a fire destroyed one of his warehouses, ending all inquiries. Chen nodded, her expression thoughtful. A convenient fire. That was a common method for eliminating evidence back then. She tapped another document. These routing orders show a special directive to redirect the shipment. That suggests high-level involvement, not just a rogue operator like Thompson. So what am I dealing with? Who would still care about gold that disappeared a century ago? Chen's eyes met his, her expression grave. History doesn't expire, Mr. Miller. Families build fortunes on secrets. Organizations protect their origins. If this gold was part of a systematic diversion, essentially a government-scale embezzlement, then there could be people who've known about it for generations. People whose wealth and position might be threatened if the full story came to light. The anonymous threats, Mike Foster's strange interest, the intruder who'd entered his home, all took on new significance. Ethan wasn't just dealing with common thieves attracted by gold. He was potentially unraveling a century-old conspiracy with modern-day guardians. What should I do? The question came out more vulnerable than he'd intended. Chen considered for a moment. Legally found property of this nature should be reported to authorities. The gold would likely be claimed by the Treasury Department, though you might be entitled to a finder's fee, typically a percentage of the value. And if these people who are threatening me get to it first, then a piece of history disappears again, and whoever's protecting this secret remains protected. She hesitated, then added, there's another angle to consider. The documents you found might be more valuable than the gold, historically speaking. They could expose not just what happened to this particular shipment, but potentially an entire network of post-war financial manipulation. That kind of revelation could affect institutions that still exist today. The implications settled over Ethan like a weight. He'd stumbled into something far larger than a hidden cache of gold. He'd uncovered a thread that, if pulled, might unravel secrets spanning generations. Chen gathered the documents, returning them to the envelope. "I'd like to help you, Mr. Miller. This connects directly to research I've been conducting for years. But I need to be clear, getting involved could increase the risk. If someone's already threatened your family, they won't hesitate to extend those threats to anyone helping you." Ethan thought of Lily's safe at Kate's house, but for how long, of his farm, his livelihood, everything he'd worked to preserve. "I don't have much choice. I can't handle this alone, and I can't ignore it now that these people have threatened my daughter." Chen nodded, a decision seemingly made. "Then we should start by investigating Walter Thompson more thoroughly, his business connections, his associates, anyone who might have been part of this operation with him. I have contacts at the National Archives who might help us access records not available to the public." "There's one local connection I'm already suspicious of," Ethan said, describing Mike Foster's unusual interest in the Titan and his claim of a family connection to similar machines. "His farm borders mine, and he offered to buy the Titan immediately after I brought it home." "We should look into his family history," Chen agreed. "But first I want to document everything you found, the compartment, the gold, every detail of the documents. I have photography equipment in my hotel room that can capture details invisible to the naked eye, markings that might tell us more about the origin of these items." They agreed that Chen would come to the farm that afternoon. Ethan would show her the Titan and the hidden compartment, but not the locations where he'd secured the gold. Trust had to be built gradually, especially with stakes this high. As they parted ways in the lobby, Chen touched his arm lightly. "Be careful driving home, Mr. Miller. And check for tails if these people are as organized as I suspect. They're watching you closely now." The warning proved prescient. Less than a mile outside town, Ethan noticed a dark sedan maintaining a consistent distance behind him. He took a series of random turns through backcountry roads, and the vehicle followed each one. When he pulled into a gas station, the sedan drove past slowly, its tinted windows concealing the driver. By the time Ethan reached his farm, his nerves were frayed. The property appeared undisturbed, but that meant little now that he knew intruders could enter without leaving obvious signs. He conducted a thorough check of the house before heading to the barn to examine the Titan. The machine stood as he'd left it, its massive frame silhouetted against the barn's interior shadows. Ethan approached the firebox, bending back the cut panel to peer inside. The remaining bundle still sat within the hidden compartment untouched since he'd redistributed the gold. He replaced the panel carefully and was turning to leave when a voice from the barn doorway froze him in place. "Found something interesting in there, didn't you?" Mike Foster stood silhouetted against the afternoon sun, his broad frame blocking the exit. He stepped inside, letting the door swing closed behind him. In the dimness, his expression was unreadable, but his posture radiated tension. Ethan straightened, calculating the distance to the nearest tool that could serve as a weapon. "Just checking the restoration progress. What are you doing on my property, Foster?" Foster moved further into the barn, his boots crunching on the dirt floor. "Cut the bullshit, Miller. We both know what's inside that machine. What I want to know is what you've done with it." "I don't know what you're talking about." Foster's laugh held no humor. "Let me remind you then. Gold bars, government documents. A map that's been in my family for generations. A map that was stolen from my grandfather by Walter Thompson before he hid the gold where he thought no one would find it." The claim caught Ethan off guard. "Your grandfather, Captain S. Blackwood, U.S. Army, 1919, one of the officers in charge of transferring gold reserves from Europe after the war ended." Foster's voice swelled with a strange pride. He and Thompson were business partners. They had a plan to divert a shipment, split it between them. But Thompson got greedy, took it all, hid it in his machines. My grandfather spent the rest of his life looking for it. The name registered immediately, Major S. Blackwood, the second signature on the documents Ethan had found. If that's true, then your grandfather was part of a criminal conspiracy to steal government property. Foster's face darkened. They called it restitution. These men had given everything to the war effort. The government promised contracts, support for their businesses afterward, then cut them loose when peace came. The gold was their due payment for sacrifices no pencil pusher in Washington could understand. Ethan noted the shift in pronouns from my grandfather to these men, as if Foster personally identified with their cause. And now you think it's yours 100 years later. I think it belongs to the families who've kept the secret, who've been searching all this time. Foster took another step forward. My father died looking for it. I've spent 30 years tracking down every machine Thompson ever built. And you just stumble across it by accident and think you can claim it. The pieces clicked into place. Foster's immediate interest in the Titan, his knowledge of its inner workings, his offer to purchase it. You're the one who broke into my house, who threatened my daughter. Something flickered across Foster's face, not guilt, but perhaps discomfort. I never threatened your kid. The note was a warning, nothing more. You stood in my kitchen while my 7-year-old was alone. You told her not to tell me you were there. She wasn't supposed to wake up. Foster waved a dismissive hand. Look, I don't want trouble with you or your family. I just want what's rightfully mine. Tell me where the gold is, hand over the documents, and in this ends. You keep the Titan, hell, I'll even help you restore it. A fair trade. Ethan's anger burned cold and clear. There's nothing fair about breaking into someone's home and threatening their child. And that gold isn't yours, it was stolen from the government a century ago. If anyone has a claim, it's the Treasury Department. Foster's expression hardened. You're making a mistake, Miller. I'm not the only one looking for this. There are others, people with more resources and fewer scruples than me. They won't ask nicely. The men in the sedan, the ones who've been following me. A flicker of surprise crossed Foster's face. You've seen them already, then you know I'm telling the truth. These people aren't local farmers with a family grudge. They represent interests that have been tracking this gold for generations, people connected to the original conspiracy who've spent decades erasing every trace of it. Who are they? Foster shook his head. I don't know names. I just know they exist. My father warned me about them before he died. Said if I ever found Thompson's cache, I should be prepared for them to appear like sharks, sensing blood in the water. Ethan studied the man before him, trying to separate truth from manipulation. Foster's story aligned with the documents he'd found with Chen's historical context. But that didn't make his claim to the gold legitimate, nor did it excuse his methods. I've already contacted someone with expertise in this area, Ethan said carefully. A historian who specializes in post-war asset transfers. She's on her way here now to document everything before I make any decisions. Foster's face paled. You've already told someone else, Christ Miller, you have no idea what you're doing. If word gets out, if these people realize the gold has been found and is being documented, they'll move quickly. They'll take everything and eliminate anyone who knows about it. Is that a threat? It's a reality check. This isn't a treasure hunt. It's a century-old crime with modern protectors. Foster glanced nervously toward the barn door. Who did you contact? What's their name? That doesn't matter. What matters is that the truth comes out properly documented by experts. If your grandfather was involved, that's part of the historical record. If you have legitimate claims, they'll be considered. Foster's laugh was bitter. Legitimate claims. There's no legal framework for this. The government will take everything, the gold, the documents, the Titan, and bury it all over again. Different vault, same secret. He stepped closer, his voice dropping. I'm trying to help you, Miller. These people who are coming, they won't care about historical records or proper documentation. They'll care about protecting powerful interests. A car engine sounded in the distance, growing louder as it approached the farm. Foster tensed, moving toward the barn window to peer outside. Is that her? Your historian? Ethan moved to the window himself, recognizing Rebecca Chen's a rental car coming up the drive. Yes, and she's already made copies of everything I found. Multiple copies stored in different locations. Whatever happens now, this story doesn't disappear again. Foster's expression cycled through anger, calculation, and finally a grim resignation. You've started something neither of us can control now. He stepped back from the window. I'll go, but this isn't over. When those men in suits come, and they will come, remember I tried to resolve this quietly. He headed for the barn's side door, pausing with his hand on the latch. One more thing. Whatever you do, don't trust anyone completely, not even your historian friend. Everyone has an agenda when it comes to this gold. Everyone. With that, he slipped outside, disappearing around the corner of the barn, just as Chen's car pulled up to the house. Ethan stood frozen for a moment, processing the encounter. Foster's warnings echoed uncomfortably with his own suspicions. The gold had remained hidden for a century, not through chance, but through deliberate effort by people with resources and motivation. People who, if Foster was to be believed, were already closing in. Chen emerged from her car carrying a leather satchel and looking around with evident curiosity. Her gaze settled on the barn, and she headed toward it with purposeful steps. Ethan moved to meet her at the door, his mind racing with new questions about what he'd stumbled into and who he could truly trust. The afternoon sun cast long shadows as Chen examined the Titan, her camera capturing every detail of the hidden compartment and the remaining bundle within. She worked methodically, asking precise questions about the condition of the machine, the method of concealment, the exact positioning of the items when Ethan first discovered them. "This is extraordinary craftsmanship," she murmured, running her fingers along the edge of the modified panel. "Not improvised or rushed. This compartment was designed as part of the machine, not added later as an afterthought." Ethan recounted his conversation with Foster, watching her reaction carefully. She showed no surprise at the mention of Captain Blackwood's name or the suggestion of a larger conspiracy. "It aligns with what I've suspected," she said, adjusting her glasses. The post-war asset transfers were vulnerable to manipulation by insiders. The records show nearly 40 tons of gold bullion that left European vaults, but never arrived at Federal Reserve destinations. Most historians attribute the discrepancies to poor record-keeping, but I've always believed it was more systematic. Foster claims these men following us represent interests that have been protecting this secret for generations. Does that make sense to you? Chen nodded grimly. Unfortunately, yes. Gold on this scale doesn't just disappear without powerful protectors. If the diversions were orchestrated by a network of military and industrial figures, as your documents suggest, then their descendants would have significant motivation to keep it buried. We're potentially talking about the origin of family fortunes, the foundation of corporate empires. "So what do we do now?" Foster said. "These people will come for the gold and eliminate anyone who knows about it." "He's trying to scare you into giving him what he wants." Chen closed her camera bag with a decisive snap. "But that doesn't mean he's entirely wrong. This discovery has implications beyond just a cache of gold bars. The documents you found could expose a conspiracy that reaches into the highest levels of post-war American finance and government." She glanced toward the barn door. "We should finish here and continue this conversation somewhere more secure. I'm not comfortable discussing next steps where we might be overheard." They completed the documentation process as quickly as thoroughness allowed. As they were preparing to leave, Chen's phone buzzed with a text message. Her expression darkened as she read it. "Is something wrong?" Ethan asked. She hesitated before answering. "Possibly. A colleague who was helping me research similar incidents just canceled our meeting tomorrow. His message seems off, not his usual tone. And you think someone got to him? I think we need to be extremely cautious moving forward." She surveyed the barn once more. "Do you have a secure place we can talk somewhere not on your property?" They agreed to meet at a diner in the next county, a place Ethan rarely frequented, where they'd be unlikely to encounter locals. As Chen drove away, Ethan locked the barn and returned to the house, a growing sense of unease settling over him. Foster's warnings, Chen's concerns, the shadowy figures who seemed to be circling closer, all suggested he'd stumbled into a conflict with dimensions he was only beginning to comprehend. The diner was nearly empty when Ethan arrived, just a few truckers at the counter and an elderly couple in a corner booth. Chen sat in the back facing the door, a cup of coffee and an untouched slice of pie before her. She nodded as he slid into the booth across from her. "I've been thinking about our next steps," she began without preamble. "We need to secure the gold and documents in a location only you know, then approach federal authorities, specifically the Treasury Department's Historical Assets Division. They handle cases of recovered government property." Ethan studied her face. "You think that's the safest option?" "I think it's the only legal option that also provides protection. Once the discovery is officially documented and in federal custody, the people threatening you lose their leverage. Your safety and your daughter's becomes a matter of federal concern. It made logical sense, yet something in her tone nagged at Ethan. You seem very certain about the procedure. Chen met his gaze steadily. Because I've helped facilitate similar recoveries before. It's part of my work, not just documenting historical anomalies, but helping return misappropriated assets to their rightful owners. And who would that be in this case, the government that lost it or the descendants of the men who took it? Legally, without question, the U.S. government. She leaned forward slightly. But as the finder, you'd be entitled to a reward typically 10–15% of the recovery value. Given the historical significance, possibly more. That's over $100,000, Mr. Miller. Enough to save your farm, secure your daughter's education. The mention of the reward struck a chord. Ethan had been so consumed with the danger the discovery had brought that he'd almost forgotten the potential legitimate benefit. $100,000 would indeed transform his circumstances, eliminate debt repair equipment, provide breathing room for the first time in years. What would happen to the historical record? The truth about what these men did? Chen hesitated. That's harder to predict. The Treasury Department would investigate, document everything. But whether that documentation becomes public or remains classified would depend on various factors, including potential impact on current institutions or reputations. Foster's bitter prediction echoed in Ethan's mind. The government will take everything and bury it all over again. Different vault, same secret. I need to think, Ethan said finally. This affects more than just me now. Chen nodded. I understand, but don't take too long. Every hour increases the risk. She slid a business card across the table with a cell phone number handwritten on the back. Call me when you decide, day or night. As Ethan drove home in the gathering dusk, his headlights cutting through the deepening shadows, he weighed his options. Chen offered a path that promised safety and financial security. Foster claimed connections to the original conspiracy that might give him historical rights to the gold, despite the illegality of its acquisition. And somewhere out there, unknown figures were closing in, determined to ensure the century-old secret remained buried. The farm was dark when he arrived, the empty house a reminder of Lily's absence. He checked locks, drew curtains, then sat at the kitchen table with a legal pad, methodically listing what he knew, what he suspected, and what remained unclear. The exercise, a habit from his engineering days, helped organize his thoughts. What he knew, the gold was real. The documents were authentic. Both had been deliberately hidden in 1919 by Walter Thompson, possibly after betraying his co-conspirator, Captain Blackwood. What he suspected Foster was Blackwood's grandson and had been searching for the gold for decades. Chen had expertise in similar cases and connections to government agencies. Multiple parties were now aware of the discovery and converging on his farm. What remained unclear? Who were the men in the sedan? Could Chen be trusted completely? Did Foster have legitimate claims despite the illegal origin of the gold? What was the safest path forward for himself and Lily? A sound outside interrupted his thoughts, the crunch of tires on gravel, then silence. Ethan moved to the window, peering cautiously through a gap in the curtains. A black sedan sat at the end of his driveway, headlights extinguished, engine off. As he watched, two figures emerged, men in dark suits moving with professional purpose toward his house. The confrontation he'd been dreading had arrived. Ethan backed away from the window, mind racing. The shotgun was upstairs. The phone was on the counter. But before he could decide on a course of action, his cell phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Open your door. We only want to talk. Resist, and this becomes much worse for you and your daughter. The mention of Lily sent ice through his veins. These men knew about her, knew where to find her. The implied threat was unmistakable. With no good options remaining, Ethan moved to the front door and opened it just as the men reached his porch. They were identical in their anonymity, similar heights, similar builds, similar expressionless faces. One stepped forward slightly. Mr. Miller, we need to discuss the contents of the Titan steam tractor you recently acquired. The two men entered without invitation, their movements precise and practiced. They surveyed the kitchen with clinical detachment before one gestured toward the table where Ethan's legal pad lay exposed. Please sit down, Mr. Miller. This conversation will be easier if we remain civilized. Ethan stood his ground, shoulders tense, calculating odds and angles. Who are you? The taller man removed his suit jacket and draped it over a chair. My name is Richard Vaughn. My colleague is Thomas Aldridge. We represent certain private interests concerned with the recovery of historical assets. No government credentials, no badges flashed, just names that could be real or fabricated, and a vague affiliation that confirmed Foster's warnings. These weren't federal agents or local authorities. They were something else entirely. You've been trespassing on my property, threatening my family. Ethan's voice remained steady despite the fear churning beneath. Vaughn didn't bother denying it. Unfortunate escalations that could have been avoided. We simply need to secure certain items. You've discovered items of significant historical value that belong to our clients. What clients? Financial institutions with lineage dating back to the post-war Reconstruction era. The contents of your steam tractor represent misallocated assets from that period. Vaughn's tone remained conversational, as if discussing a minor accounting discrepancy rather than a century-old conspiracy. We're prepared to offer fair compensation for their return. $50,000 transferred to your account immediately. The amount, a fraction of the gold's true value, told Ethan everything he needed to know about these men and the interests they represented. They weren't negotiating. They were going through motions before taking what they wanted. That gold was government property. War Department manifests confirm it. Aldridge, who had been silently examining the kitchen, turned his attention to Ethan. Government records from that era are incomplete at best, deliberately misleading at worst. The official narrative doesn't reflect the complex agreements between public and private entities during Reconstruction. A sanitized version of Foster's claim that the gold had been restitution for broken promises. Ethan wondered if these men were connected to Blackwood's legacy or represented a competing faction in the original conspiracy. I've already notified authorities. The lie came easily, a desperate attempt to establish leverage. Everything I've found has been documented by historical experts. Copies have been secured in multiple locations. Vaughn's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes, a coldness that transformed the room's atmosphere. Mr. Miller, let me be absolutely clear. We know your daughter is staying with your sister Catherine in Des Moines. We know you've spoken with Rebecca Chen, a journalist with a troubling habit of sensationalizing historical finance. We know the gold is no longer in the Titan. You've moved it to at least 2 separate locations. The precision of their intelligence sent ice through Ethan's veins. They'd been watching him more closely than he'd realized, tracking his movements, possibly intercepting his calls. What exactly do you want from me? Everything, Aldridge said simply. The gold bars, all documents from the Titan, any copies you've made, the names of everyone you've told about this discovery. Once we've secured these items and verified your cooperation, you'll receive payment, and this matter will be permanently closed. And if I refuse, Vaughn smiled thinly, we are reasonable men representing reasonable interests. We prefer cooperation. But make no mistake, these assets will be recovered tonight with or without your assistance. The only variable is what condition you and your family are in afterward. The threat hung in the air, precise and measured. These men hadn't survived a century protecting their secret by making empty promises. I need to make a call, Ethan said, fighting to keep his voice level, to check on my daughter. By all means, Vaughn nodded toward Ethan's phone on the counter. But please use speakerphone. We wouldn't want any misunderstandings. Ethan dialed Kate's number, each ring stretching his nerves tighter. When she answered, the normalcy in her voice was jarring against the tension filling his kitchen. Hey, just checking in. How's Lily doing? He kept his tone deliberately casual, hyper-aware of the men monitoring every word. She's great. We just finished making cookies. Want to talk to her? Not right now. She's probably busy with the sugar crash. Just wanted to make sure everything was okay. Everything's fine. You sound stressed, though. Farm trouble? Ethan caught Vaughn's warning look. Nothing I can't handle. Listen, if anything comes up, anything at all, call Mrs. Winters next door. She'll know what to do. The neighbor's name was a desperate code, something Kate might recognize as unusual enough to put her on alert. Mrs. Winters, okay, whatever you say. You sure you're all right? Everything's fine. I'll call tomorrow. Kiss Lily goodnight for me. After hanging up, Ethan turned back to the men. Their presence filled the small kitchen, compressing the air, eliminating options. I'll need time to collect everything. It's not all in one place. We have all night, Mr. Miller. Vaughn checked his watch with theatrical patience. Where shall we begin? Before Ethan could answer, headlights swept across the front windows, a vehicle turning into his driveway. All three men tensed, Aldridge moving swiftly to the window, while Vaughn's hand disappeared beneath his jacket. Expecting company. Vaughn's voice had lost all pretense of civility. Ethan genuinely wasn't, which made the arrival even more concerning. No. Aldridge peered through the curtains. Black SUV, single occupant, female. Rebecca Chen. She must have followed up on their meeting, perhaps concerned by how they'd left things. Her arrival couldn't have come at a worse moment, or perhaps a better one. Another person on the property complicated the men's plans, provided a potential witness. It's the historian I mentioned, the one documenting the discovery. Ethan watched Vaughn's reaction carefully. Invite her on in, calmly. Any indication that something's amiss and this situation deteriorates immediately. Vaughn's hand remained inside his jacket, the implied threat unmistakable. Chen knocked at the door moments later. When Ethan opened it, her smile faded instantly as she read the tension in his face. Before he could speak, she stepped inside, eyes quickly assessing the two strangers in the kitchen. I was concerned when you didn't call. I see you have company. Her tone was neutral, professional, but her eyes flicked to Ethan's in a silent question. Ms. Chen, what a fortunate coincidence. Vaughn extended his hand with practiced charm. Richard Vaughn, my colleague, and I were just discussing the historical artifacts Mr. Miller has discovered. I understand you've been helping document them. Chen shook his hand briefly, wariness evident in her posture. That's right. The find has significant implications for our understanding of post-war asset transfers. Indeed, we represent certain private interests with historical connections to those very transfers. Perhaps we could combine our knowledge. A collaborative approach often yields the most comprehensive understanding. The exchange of pleasantries masked an unmistakable current of tension. Chen moved to stand beside Ethan, a subtle but deliberate positioning that made her allegiance clear. Mr. Vaughn, with all due respect, private interests rarely prioritize historical accuracy over their own narratives. My commitment is to documented facts and transparency. Vaughn's smile tightened. Admirable principles. However, I think you'll find the historical record is seldom black and white, particularly when it comes to government operations during that period. The standoff continued, each side measuring the other. Ethan felt the balance shifting, no longer a lone farmer against two professional operators, but a more complex equation. Chen's presence complicated their tactics, forced them to maintain at least a veneer of legitimacy. Mr. Miller has agreed to return the assets to their rightful owners, Vaughn continued smoothly. We were just discussing arrangements for collection and compensation. I haven't agreed to anything, Ethan corrected, drawing strength from Chen's presence. And I question your definition of rightful owners. Chen set her bag on the table with deliberate calm. Before any transfers occur, I should inform you that I've already filed preliminary documentation with the Historical Assets Division at the Treasury Department. The case number and full documentation of everything Mr. Miller discovered has been submitted electronically. Ethan couldn't tell if she was bluffing, but the statement landed with visible impact. Aldridge exchanged a glance with Vaughn, whose expression hardened almost imperceptibly. That was premature and potentially problematic, Vaughn said, his tone cooling. Government involvement typically complicates these matters unnecessarily. Government involvement is mandatory when the assets in question bear War Department seals and manifest numbers, Chen countered. This isn't a private estate matter. It's the recovery of federal property that was misappropriated during a critical historical period. The dynamic in the room had shifted again, the pretense of polite negotiation cracking under the weight of competing agendas. Vaughn's hand had returned to the inner pocket of his jacket, and Aldridge had positioned himself between them and the door. I think we should continue this discussion at a more official venue, Chen suggested, maintaining her professional composure. I can arrange a meeting with Treasury representatives tomorrow morning. All parties can present their claims in a secure, documented environment. I'm afraid that won't be possible. Vaughn's voice had lost all warmth. Our instructions are to resolve this matter tonight conclusively. The implication hung in the air like smoke. Whatever happened in this farmhouse tonight, these men had no intention of allowing official channels to become involved. Ethan caught Chen's eye, a moment of silent communication passing between them. They were now effectively hostages in his own home, with options rapidly diminishing. A phone rang, not Ethan's, but one of the men's. Aldridge retrieved it from his pocket, listened briefly, then covered the mouthpiece. "It's Harlow. Says there's movement at the perimeter." Vaughn frowned. "Tell him to hold position and observe." "What perimeter?" Ethan demanded. "Who else is on my property?" "Security precautions, Mr. Miller. Standard procedure for sensitive asset recovery." Vaughn's attention had shifted, his focus split between the immediate confrontation and some new development outside. Chen used the distraction to move closer to Ethan, her voice barely audible. "Where's the gold?" "Safe," he whispered back. "Not here." Aldridge finished his call, his expression grim. Multiple vehicles approaching from the north access road. At least 3 moving without lights. Vaughn's demeanor changed instantly, professional calm, giving way to operational focus. "How many personnel? Unknown. Harlow's repositioning for better surveillance." "Who else knows about the gold?" Vaughn demanded, rounding on Ethan. "No one, I told." But even as he said it, Ethan thought of Mike Foster, who claimed generational knowledge of the hidden cache, who'd warned of competing interests. The distant sound of engines grew steadily louder, multiple vehicles approaching across the fields rather than using the main drive. Vaughn made a swift decision, gesturing to Aldridge. "Change of plans. Secure these 2 and prepare for immediate extraction. Priority is the asset location, nothing else matters now." Aldridge moved with practiced efficiency, producing zip ties from his pocket. But before he could reach them, Chen's hand darted into her bag and emerged holding a small canister. Without hesitation, she released a cloud of pepper spray directly into Aldridge's face. The effect was instantaneous. Aldridge reeled backward, hands clutching at his eyes, a strangled cry escaping his throat. Vaughn reached for his weapon, but Ethan was already moving, driving his shoulder into the man's midsection with all the force he could muster. They crashed into the kitchen counter, dishes shattering on the floor, Vaughn's gun skittering across the linoleum. "Run!" Chen grabbed Ethan's arm, pulling him toward the back door. "Get to my car." They burst out of the house into the cool night air, sprinting across the yard. Behind them, shouting erupted from inside the kitchen. Ahead, Chen's SUV sat just 20 yards away, keys already in her hand. The first gunshot cracked through the night, a bullet splintering wood from the porch railing beside them. Ethan ducked instinctively, pulling Chen lower as they ran. They reached the vehicle, Chen frantically unlocking it with trembling fingers. As they climbed in, more shots rang out, one shattering the rear window in a spray of glass. Chen started the engine and slammed it into reverse tires, spinning on gravel as they backed away from the house. In the headlights, Vaughn appeared on the porch, gun raised for another shot. Before he could fire, something unexpected happened. A new volley of gunfire erupted from the darkness near the barn, forcing Vaughn to dive for cover. Chen spun the wheel, shifting to drive and accelerating down the driveway. In the rearview mirrors, Ethan glimpsed multiple figures converging on his house. From the fields, dark silhouettes carrying weapons moving with military precision. "Who the hell are those people?" Chen's voice was tight with adrenaline as she navigated the darkened country road, driving without headlights. "I don't know." Ethan twisted in his seat, watching the chaos receding behind them. Foster mentioned others looking for the gold, people with more resources and fewer scruples. Maybe they've finally arrived. Whoever they are, they just saved our lives. Chen took a sharp turn onto a side road, putting distance between them and the farm. Though I doubt that was their intention. Reality crashed over Ethan in waves. Armed men had invaded his home, threatened his family, and now appeared to be engaged in open warfare on his property. Whatever historical secret lay buried in the Titan, it commanded enough value for people to kill over it, even a century later. "We need to call the police," he said, reaching for his phone. Chen shook her head vehemently. "Not yet. Not until we're somewhere safe. Those weren't ordinary criminals back there, Ethan. They were professionals with connections. Local authorities could be compromised. My farm is already a battlefield. Going back would be suicide." Chen navigated another turn, taking them deeper into the network of rural roads. "We need to think strategically now. Where's the gold?" Ethan hesitated, ingrained caution warring with the need for trust. "I split it up. Most is hidden in an abandoned root cellar at the Johnson property 3 miles east of my farm. 1 bar and the original documents are in my gun safe at home behind a false panel the intruders wouldn't find easily." "Smart." Chen checked the mirrors constantly as she drove. And the copies of the documents. I sent digital copies to my email account, and I left a sealed envelope with Mrs. Winters, my neighbor. She thinks it's just farm paperwork I want kept safe. Chen nodded approvingly. Good redundancy. Now we need a safe location to regroup and contact authorities, but not local police. This needs to go straight to federal level. I know a place, Ethan said after a moment's thought. An old hunting cabin that belonged to my father-in-law. It's about 40 miles north, isolated off the grid. No one would connect it to me. Elizabeth inherited it, and the property is still in her maiden name. Perfect. Chen made another turn heading north. How well armed are these people likely to be? The ones who arrived at the end? I have no idea. Foster made them sound professional, organized, more like a private military than common criminals. Competing interests, Chen mused. Not government, not local. Who would have both the resources and the motivation to mount an armed operation over century-old gold? Descendants of the original conspirators, Ethan suggested. Foster claimed his grandfather was one of the officers involved. Maybe other families maintain similar interests, passed down knowledge of the missing shipment. Possible. But this level of organization suggests something more structured than family vendettas. Financial institutions, perhaps. Private banks with historical ties to the post-war reconstruction efforts. If the diverted gold formed the foundation of their initial capital, the implications were staggering. Not just a historical theft, but potentially the secret origin of modern financial empires built on assets stolen during the chaos of post-war reconstruction. No wonder someone would kill to keep that buried. They drove in tense silence for several miles, taking a circuitous route toward the cabin. Chen maintained a vigilant watch for pursuit, while Ethan struggled with the magnitude of what had been unleashed. His quiet farm life had been shattered. His home turned into a war zone, his daughter potentially endangered, all because of a whim to buy an old tractor at auction. I should call my sister, he said suddenly, the thought of Lily sending a fresh wave of panic through him. Make sure they're safe. Chen hesitated, then nodded. Use my phone. Yours might be compromised. Ethan dialed with unsteady fingers, exhaling in relief when Kate answered. It's me, he said quickly. Don't use my name. Are you and the little one okay? Kate's voice came through, confused but alert. We're fine. What's going on? You're scaring me. I can't explain everything now, but I need you to do something for me. Take her and go to a hotel, not one you'd normally use. Pay cash, use a different name when you check in. Don't tell anyone where you're going, not even close friends. You're serious. This is really happening. Deadly serious. I'll contact you when it's safe, but it might not be from my regular number. Ethan struggled to keep his voice steady. I'm okay, but there's trouble. Big trouble. Just keep her safe and stay hidden until you hear from me. After ending the call, Ethan sat in silence, the full weight of their situation settling over him. Chen drove with practiced focus, navigating the dark country roads from his occasional directions. They won't just give up, she said finally. Whatever their agenda, they've invested too much to walk away now. So what's our play? We can't outrun them forever. We document everything properly, then contact the Treasury Department's Specialized Historical Assets team. They have jurisdiction over recovered government property, especially items with military provenance. Chen's voice took on a determined edge. Once the gold is officially in federal custody, these private interests lose their ability to operate in the shadows. You sound like you've done this before. Chen kept her eyes on the road. Let's just say this isn't my first encounter with powerful interests trying to rewrite history. The cabin appeared as they rounded a bend in the narrow forest road, a small rustic structure nestled among pine trees. No electricity, no running water, just a simple shelter, miles from civilization. Ethan directed Chen to park behind the building, concealing the vehicle from the access road. Inside the cabin was dusty but intact. Ethan found an old kerosene lamp and matches in the expected place, providing dim illumination. The interior was basic, a main room with a small wood stove, a rudimentary kitchen area, a bedroom with 2 bunks and a storage closet stocked with emergency supplies. We should be safe here for the night, he said, checking the cabin's perimeter. Nobody knows about this place except family, and even they rarely visit anymore. Chen set her bag on the rough-hewn table, removing a satellite phone and a small laptop. I need to document everything you've told me before we contact authorities. The more detailed our report, the harder it will be for anyone to make this disappear. While Chen prepared her equipment, Ethan secured the cabin, checking locks, closing curtains, taking inventory of supplies. His mind kept returning to the farm, to his home under siege, to the gold that had unleashed such chaos. Part of him wanted to return to defend his property, to face whatever came head-on. But that instinct warred with his responsibilities. As a father, Lily needed him alive, not heroic. "Ethan, I need you to walk me through everything again," Chen called from the table. "Start with the auction. Every detail matters." For the next hour, Ethan recounted the entire sequence of events, while Chen documented meticulously the discovery of the hidden compartment, the gold bars with their distinctive markings, the War Department documents with their routing codes and signatures. She photographed the copies he'd made, recorded his descriptions, and created a comprehensive timeline of events. "This is enough to initiate an official investigation," she said, finally reviewing her work. "The historical significance alone would warrant government intervention even without the value of the gold itself." "And what happens then to the Titan, to me and Lily?" Chen hesitated. "Legally, the gold would be reclaimed as government property. But as I mentioned, there's typically a finder's fee, especially in cases of historical significance. The Titan would likely be preserved in a museum given its connection to such a significant discovery." She closed her laptop with a decisive click. "As for you and Lily, once the assets are secured by federal authorities, the threat should diminish significantly. These people operate in shadows. Official documentation and federal custody shine too much light for them to continue their methods." Ethan wanted to believe her, but doubt lingered. "And you're certain you have the right contacts, people who can move quickly, who won't be influenced by whatever connections these men have?" "I've built my career on exposing historical financial irregularities. It's made me enemies, but it's also given me allies in government offices who care about historical truth." Chen's expression was earnest, determined. "I promise you, Ethan, by this time tomorrow, the gold will be in secure federal custody, and you'll be on your way to reclaiming your normal life." The satellite phone beeped softly as she powered it on. "I'll make the call now. My contact works unusual hours, occupational necessity in his position." As Chen stepped into the bedroom for privacy, Ethan found himself staring out the cabin window into the darkness beyond. Foster's warning echoed in his mind. "Don't trust anyone completely, not even your historian friend. Everyone has an agenda when it comes to this gold." What was Chen's true agenda? She'd appeared in his life at precisely the moment he had discovered the gold, offering expertise that aligned perfectly with his needs. She'd documented everything meticulously, gained his trust, learned the location of his hidden cache. Now she was making a call that would supposedly bring government protection. But what if? The thought was interrupted by the sound of Chen returning, her expression triumphant. "It's done. My contact is activating a specialized recovery team. They'll meet us tomorrow morning at a secure location to take custody of the gold and original documents." "How do we know these are really government agents? Those men at my farm could easily claim the same credentials." "I've worked with this team before. The agent in charge is someone I trust implicitly." Chen's confidence was unwavering. "They'll have proper identification documentation and a secure transport protocol. Everything by the book." Ethan nodded slowly, reserving judgment. Trust was a luxury he could no longer afford, not with Lily's safety at stake. "And the finder's fee you mentioned, how does that process work?" "There will be paperwork, an official assessment of value, then a determination of percentage based on historical significance. In a case this unique, I'd expect the upper range, perhaps 15% of assessed value." Chen began packing her equipment with practiced efficiency. "The Treasury Department doesn't mess around with these things. Once they commit to a recovery operation, it moves quickly." The conversation was interrupted by a distant sound, the unmistakable rumble of vehicles on the forest road. Chen froze, her eyes meeting Ethan's in silent alarm. They moved simultaneously to extinguish the lamp, plunging the cabin into darkness, broken only by slivers of moonlight through the curtains. Ethan crept to the window, peering carefully through a gap in the fabric. At first he saw nothing but the silver-touched forest. Then headlights appeared in the distance, moving slowly down the access road, not just one vehicle, but three in sequence, driving without full lights. "How?" Chen whispered, joining him at the window. "How could they have found us?" Ethan's mind raced through possibilities. My phone, they could have tracked it. Or your car might have been followed. Or a darker thought took shape. Or someone knew exactly where we were going. Chen tensed beside him. What are you suggesting? Before Ethan could answer, the lead vehicle stopped about 100 yards from the cabin. Doors opened, figures emerged moving with the same disciplined precision he'd glimpsed at the farm. Even in the dim moonlight, the silhouettes of weapons were unmistakable. We need to leave. Now. Ethan moved toward the rear door. There's a trail through the woods that leads to an old logging road. If we can reach it. The sound of breaking glass interrupted him as something crashed through the cabin's front window. A metallic canister bounced across the floor, immediately spewing dense white smoke that filled the space with alarming speed. Gas! Chen cried, pulling her shirt over her nose and mouth. Get out. They stumbled toward the back door, eyes stinging, lungs burning with each breath of the rapidly spreading chemical agent. Ethan reached the door first, fumbling with the lock as the cabin filled with disorienting smoke. He pushed it open, gasping for clean air, pulling Chen through behind him. Outside, the night air provided momentary relief, but the sound of approaching footsteps eliminated any chance of reprieve. Figures were converging on the cabin from multiple directions, using the cover of trees to advance methodically toward their position. This way, Ethan whispered urgently, pulling Chen toward a narrow gap in the underbrush where the trail began. They pushed through branches, stumbling in the darkness, guided only by Ethan's childhood memories of the path and the dim illumination of stars filtering through the canopy. Behind them, voices called out as their escape was discovered. Flashlight beams cut through the darkness, sweeping across the forest floor, searching for signs of movement. The pursuit had begun in earnest, multiple teams spreading out to flank their position. Who are these people? Chen gasped as they ran, branches whipping against them in the darkness. Does it matter? Ethan pushed forward relentlessly. Whoever sent them knows about the cabin, knows I'd come here. That means they know more about me than random thieves should. The accusation hung between them as they fled deeper into the forest, the sounds of pursuit growing more distant as the terrain grew steeper, more challenging for their pursuers. After nearly 20 minutes of hard travel, they paused in a small clearing, both gasping for breath. We need to split up, Ethan said, his decision already made. They're after the gold. You have all the documentation. Get it to your federal contacts. I'll lead them away, then make my way to the root cellar. That's suicide, Chen protested. These aren't amateurs, Ethan. They're organized, equipped, and determined. Exactly why one of us needs to reach authorities with proof of what's happening. Ethan's voice was firm. You have the copies, the documentation, the contacts. I know these woods, this area. I can evade them long enough. Chen studied his face, and the faint moonlight conflicted emotions playing across her features. Finally, she reached into her bag and removed a small device. Take this. It's a personal locator beacon, military grade. Activate it when you're ready for extraction, and my contact will find you. Ethan accepted the device, tucking it into his pocket. Head east from here. There's a county highway about 2 miles through those trees. You should be able to flag down help or reach the nearest town. What about you? I'll circle back toward the farm eventually. Need to assess the situation, see what's left. He wasn't sharing his full plan. Trust had become too precious a commodity. Go, now, before they close in again. Chen hesitated, then nodded. Be careful, Ethan, and remember, once the gold is in federal custody, this ends. For all of us. They parted ways, Chen heading east while Ethan moved north deliberately, leaving obvious signs of his passage to draw pursuers away from her escape route. He pushed through underbrush, noisily breaking branches, creating a trail that even amateur trackers could follow. The ruse worked. Within minutes, he heard voices converging on his position, following the false trail he'd created. Ethan increased his pace, moving deeper into familiar territory, the woods where he'd hunted with his father-in-law years ago. Every gully, ridge, and deadfall offered potential advantage, ways to confuse pursuit or create distance. For nearly an hour, Ethan led his pursuers on a grueling chase through increasingly difficult terrain, gradually angling back toward the general direction of his farm. The original team had been joined by others. He glimpsed flashlights converging from multiple directions, heard the crackle of radio communications as they coordinated their efforts. Eventually, he found what he'd been searching for, a steep ravine with a seasonal creek at its bottom, now mostly dry in the autumn weather. Ethan descended carefully, using roots and rocks as handholds in the darkness. At the bottom, he moved quickly along the creek bed, for several hundred yards before climbing the opposite bank at a point where rocky ground would leave minimal tracks. The maneuver bought him critical time. The pursuit sounds grew distant, then scattered as his trail disappeared. Ethan used the opportunity to orient himself, identifying familiar landmarks in the night landscape. He was approximately 4 miles from his farm, as the crow flies perhaps 6 by navigable terrain. Dawn was still hours away as he began the journey back, moving with greater caution now that immediate pursuit had been evaded. His mind worked ceaselessly processing the night's events, searching for the thread that would make sense of it all. Who had sent the armed teams? Were they connected to Vaughn and Aldridge or competitors? How had they known about the cabin? And most troubling, could he truly trust Chen to do as she'd promised? By the time the eastern sky began to lighten with the first hints of dawn, Ethan had reached the outskirts of his property. He approached cautiously, using the cover of a drainage ditch to observe the farmhouse from a distance. The scene that greeted him sent a chill through his exhausted body. Multiple vehicles were parked in his yard, black SUVs similar to those that had pursued them at the cabin. Armed figures patrolled the perimeter, while others appeared to be conducting a systematic search of the property. The barn doors stood open, lights visible inside where people moved around the Titan. More disturbing, a temporary command post had been established on his front lawn tables, with equipment, communications gear, what appeared to be maps and documents spread out for review. This was no hastily assembled criminal operation. It had the hallmarks of a professional intelligence gathering and asset recovery mission. As Ethan watched a familiar figure emerge from the house, Rebecca Chen moving with confidence among the operatives consulting documents, giving what appeared to be directions. She showed no signs of having fled through the forest or evaded armed pursuers. Instead, she operated with the authority of someone in charge. The betrayal struck Ethan like a physical blow. Chen hadn't been captured or coerced, she was directing the operation. Her documentation of his discovery, her promises of government protection, her strategic advice, all part of an elaborate deception to locate and secure the gold. Foster's warning echoed with painful clarity. Don't trust anyone completely, not even your historian friend. As the realization sank in, Ethan's priorities crystallized with newfound clarity. The gold no longer mattered. The historical truth, the government claims the finder's fee, all irrelevant compared to his daughter's safety. If Chen had betrayed him, if she was working with these people, then everything he'd told her was compromised, including Kate's involvement and Lily's location. Moving with renewed purpose, despite his exhaustion, Ethan backed away from his observation point and circled toward the east side of his property. The Johnson farm where he'd hidden the majority of the gold lay in that direction, not because he intended to recover it, but because his truck was still parked near the abandoned root cellar, offering his best chance at transportation. The morning light grew stronger as Ethan made his way across fields and through woodlots, avoiding roads and open areas. His mind formulated and discarded plans, searching for the safest path forward. One certainty remained: he needed to reach Kate and Lily before Chen's people did warn them, move them to genuine safety. After nearly an hour of careful movement, Ethan approached the Johnson property from its southern boundary. The abandoned farmstead appeared deserted, no vehicles visible, except his own truck, parked where he'd left it near the collapsing barn. He observed for several minutes from the cover of overgrown hedgerows, confirming no movement or signs of surveillance before approaching. The truck started on the first try, its familiar rumble providing a small comfort in a world turned unfamiliar and hostile. Ethan pulled away from the Johnson farm, taking back roads and avoiding main highways. His destination wasn't Des Moines, where Kate lived, that would be too obvious. Instead, he headed west toward the small town where Elizabeth's parents had lived before their passing, where distant relatives might still provide temporary shelter. As farmland gave way to rolling hills, Ethan's thoughts returned to the Titan, the innocent purchase that had transformed his life in less than a week. A century-old machine containing a century-old secret, connecting him to forces and conspiracies he'd never imagined. Whatever happened now, he knew his quiet existence as a struggling farmer had ended the moment he'd raised his hand at that auction and bid $1 for a piece of forgotten history. The sun climbed higher in the autumn sky, illuminating a landscape unchanged by the human dramas playing out beneath it. Somewhere ahead lay an uncertain reunion with Lily. Somewhere behind lay the gold that men were willing to kill for. Between them, Ethan Miller drove westward, a man whose simple life had collided with history's long-buried secrets, determined to protect the only treasure that truly mattered.